So before we started, we were sitting down in one of the dressing rooms, and we were having a conversation about, communicating science and reason and fixing issues. And one of the things that popped up that I thought we might start with, the internet seems to have given power to people, which is a good thing, I would say, and power to ideas and the opportunity to share ideas. None of us can become an expert in everything. You just don't have the time or the bandwidth. So how do we deal with the issue of trying to figure out which experts, what criteria should people use to figure out which experts are worth listening to in an age where everyone has been empowered to become their own expert and just become science deniers or fact deniers, alternative fact deniers?
Richard, you've been at this longer. I'll let you start this.
It's a really difficult problem. In science, we have peer review, that kind of thing. We have methods in place for not respecting authority necessarily, but we know that an article that's written in a reputable scientific journal has been peer reviewed. We know that the findings will be, if they're important, if they're controversial, they will be replicated, and if they're not repeated, it'll be a matter for suspicion. No scientist has the knowledge to understand all other science. I mean, reading even a journal like Nature or Science, I can read the biological papers, some of them, I can't read the physics papers. So you have to rely on authority to some extent, and it's a very difficult problem because we pay lip service to the idea that we don't actually respect authority just because it is authority, just because it's Professor so-and-so. Professor says somebody something who has FRS and so on. So it is a difficult problem, and when I try to understand physics, I have to some extent, obviously, rely on authority. As you say, Matt, the internet raises problems that everybody has a voice. And fortunately, not everybody has quite the same reach as everybody else, but nevertheless, it is a problem, and we get politicians telling us things like, you are the experts now. Well, I'm not an expert on most things, and nor are you, and nor are you. Nobody's an expert on everything. And so it is a difficult stage we're in, where people are being treated as though all opinions are equally valid.
Yeah, it actually strikes me as a fairly subtle and difficult to communicate point that in science and in intellectual life generally, we don't rely on authority, except we do up until the moment we repudiate authority. I mean, you have to be competent to the conversation in order to completely subvert the status quo. And so, it's true that science advances by discovering that the authorities were wrong, at least on important marginal points, and sometimes just wrong wholesale. But it's just as Richard says, I mean, it's impossible to have the totality of human knowledge self-authenticated, and the only reason why we're confident that anything is the way it is because we are content to rely on authorities most of the time, and the reason why that faith, to use a loaded word, is valid is because these authorities are functioning in a culture that is, in the best case, and science really is the best case here, continually purifying itself of error, and it's not being driven by ideology, and it's not being channeled by accidents of birth. You don't have a Japanese science and an American science, and with nationalism getting in the way, and so there's a process that we rely on, and both things are true. We rely on authority and we don't.
So I'm fond of pointing out that, I don't have faith. I won't use the word to describe this, because I think what I have is a confidence level, a trust that is, to borrow from Hume, proportional to the evidence that supports it. And there are people who would just say, well, you're not only are you picking and choosing your experts, but you might be picking and choosing the evidence you want. Is it the case that as science is the single most consistently reliable tool that we have for discovering things about reality, but we've taught people about the scientific method, which is an inaccurate way of looking at it because there are multiple methods. And we realize that the way we get to new information is by challenging and overthrowing the existing information. And so you get the people who are like, oh, you laugh at me now, but they laughed at Newton, or they laughed at, Have we constructed a system inadvertently where we're going to be constantly fighting this battle, and it's just amplified by our current access to massive amounts of opinions and information?
Well, it's amplified, and also the capacity to detect error is also amplified. This is just the dual effect of the internet, which half of which is perverse. That is, if you want to remain a slave to confirmation bias, you can forever, apparently, on the internet. But if you actually want to discover if you're mistaken, you can also do that pretty quickly.